I want to thank everybody for coming out this morning. It started out as a pretty interesting morning. One of our associates who had all the books and all the stuff, whether lives not very far from us, called about 6:15 and said, "Can you come get me? I can't get out of my apartment complex because all the rain and stuff cut out all the electricity." So I'm glad we're all here. And I would like to acknowledge our co-hosts, John Dennis with Woodrock Company, Scott Irvine with ABIP, Kevin Roth, and Andrew Gardner. There's Kevin with Tanglewood Legacy Advisors. So this is our third leadership breakfast, and we hope to have another one this fall with John McCullough, who is the CEO of James Avery. Next spring we hope to have Scott McClellan, who all of you know was the president of HEB stores. And also want to acknowledge, they're not here, but I'd like to also acknowledge the leadership team of what was then Jones and Carter, became Quiddity Engineering 10 years ago, for being willing to go through a pretty rigorous and onerous process that ultimately resulted in my good friend Bob Aylward over here being placed as president and CEO of Jones and Carter, which is now Quiddity Engineering. Bob is one of the most amazing leaders I've ever met, and he was not the obvious candidate. I think most people, if you're placing the CEO of an engineering firm, normally you would look for an engineer, right? But that's not what happened. And I'm not going to take any of Bob's thunder. I'll let him tell the rest of the story. But this is going to be exciting. You're going to learn a lot. Everybody be sure to get a book before you leave. And without any further ado, here's Bob Aylward.
Well, thank you, Rob. I appreciate that generous introduction. It's frankly great to be back in the great state of Texas. After retiring, my wife and I had moved to the Charlotte, North Carolina area because we had two of our children who live in that area, grandkids. But I can tell you something that North Carolina's got a lot of great things, but they don't know how to do Tex-Mex. And when I hit the ground here yesterday, I think it took me about 20 minutes to find a Torchy's. So I was very pleased to be back here. And so again, just appreciate you all coming out today, and I'm happy to take any questions. You can feel free to interrupt me if there's something I'm saying that's not clear. If you need to get up and get coffee or whatever that's you're not going to bother me, feel free to do that as well. I put a lot of thought into what I was going to talk to you about today, and rather than just kind of try to take you through sort of a history of where I've been and what I did, I think what I really wanted to do is challenge you to think about leadership, maybe in a more strategic way. So much of leading an organization, you're really consumed with what I call sort of the tyranny of the urgent. There's seemingly always something that's landed on your desk, somebody is nipping at your heels, and sometimes you feel like you're going fighting one fire to another. And it can be exhausting, it can be terribly stressful, and you may sit there and feel like, how am I ever going to have time to really think strategically? But I do think there is a model that can convey that, and so that's really what I wanted to try to do today. The title of this talk, Becoming a Leader That People Want to Follow, I think it hints at a truth that if you've been in a leadership role for any length of time, you know to be 100% true. And that is that just because you got a title, CEO or president, you're sitting in the corner office, you're getting paid, theoretically the big bucks, that really doesn't mean people are going to listen to you. They may nod sweetly, they may smile at you, and then proceed to do something completely foreign to what you really wanted them to do. And you can have all these miscommunications throughout your practice of leading an organization. And part of this, I think, is we've got to really think differently about how we're going to engage and how we're going to do it. And that's really the bulk of what I really want to talk about today. But before I get into that, just give you a little bit of my background so you kind of know who's talking at you today. As Rob said, I'm not an engineer, although I've worked around engineers pretty much my entire life. Academically trained as an economist, which I think that means I was pretty good at math. I really didn't know what to do with that skill. I've got an MBA, probably the most relevant thing you care about, 26 years of being a CEO and president. I've operated in a variety of different industries. Most of it is kind of in that B2B sort of space. A lot of infrastructure type of activities. And then ownership structures, I mean, I've run everything from Fortune 500 companies down to barely solvent single proprietorship. So and just about everything in between. So hopefully something in there will resonate with you as you're dealing with your issues of leading your organizations. So 3 topics I want to cover today. You know, Rob asked me a couple weeks ago how things were going on the presentation, and I told him I was in trouble because originally I had a few more topics, but when I was practicing to talk, I was supposed to keep this to an hour, and I found I was halfway through the slides and I was already an hour and 45 minutes into it. So I had to make some trimming, and hopefully I won't do a bad job of managing my time today. But the first thing I want to spend probably half the talk on is really leading with purpose. And what do I mean by that is kind of this strategic view of thinking about leadership and how to engage in a way that I hope will make your job a little bit easier and hopefully a little bit less stressful. I want to spend some time talking about organizational culture. This is something that I know is getting a lot of ink, a lot of people talking about culture. There's a lot of things floating around out there, and I'd like to sort of bring sort of my spin onto this. And then I wanted to leave you with some specific things. I mean, obviously we can talk about tactics. We could have covered any number of things. We could have talked about operations, we could have talked about financial management, risk management. But you know, again, recognizing that the room here was probably pretty diverse in terms of interest. Most organizations are interested in improving their marketing or improving their sales management. You know, getting that growth is kind of a key driver. So I picked those 2. We could certainly talk about a bunch of others, so I'll give you some insights as to how I like to think about that when I was running organizations. Okay, so start off with leading with purpose. As Rob said, you know, I recently published the book, The Leadership Alchemist. When I was writing the manuscript for that, the working title that was in the back of my mind was something like this first bullet point. Congratulations, you're in charge, now what? And I remember often thinking when I first became a CEO, 2 conflicting thoughts. One was, I know what I'm doing, which turned out to be not true. And then the second thing was, oh my God, what am I doing? How did I get here? And you know, I think running an organization is one of the most awesome and yet terrifying responsibilities that you can have. Because people are looking at you, you're supposed to know what's going on, you've got all the answers, and you realize very quickly that the decisions you make or don't make not just affect your career, affect the company, but affects the lives of the people that are working there and are depending on you and their families. And so that's a very serious responsibility. One of the challenges I think that happens, you know, unless you inherited your company from a family member, chances are you got promoted to the senior level position because you were exceptionally good at a lower level position, you know, whatever that might have been. You excelled at that. Somebody saw your potential. They saw your ability to get problems solved at a lower level, and they thought to themselves, hey, maybe they can handle some bigger issue problems, and presto changeo, you're in charge, okay? And I would tell you that my experience looking at that, not only for myself, but just other executives that I've coached over the years, is that the skills that make you really good at lower, intermediate level positions don't really necessarily translate to the higher level. I mean, if you think about that, it's really not that surprising that that's the case. I mean, the types of problems you're dealing with, the breadth of human beings and their characteristics, you know, grows exponentially from, you know, running a work unit to running a company. The types of pressures you've got to deal with are significantly different. So we shouldn't necessarily expect that those skills are in fact going to translate. And in fact, I would suggest to you that often they do not. Unless you work at a company that really has decided to make an investment in leadership development, you may have been thrown in that position with hardly any real training or coaching at all. And you're just somehow supposed to know how to do that. But I would say even if you've been to a training program, most of the ones I saw when I grew up in this, you know, they tended to be either very focused on the administrative side of what it means to run a company, or they're very academic. you know, theoretical discussions about leadership or management, and they're woefully short on sort of the day-to-day, how do I get this beast running in the right direction and doing things. And you really are left with a trial and error process, and that's fine, there's nothing wrong with on-the-job training, but it comes at a cost, right? It's expensive to do this not only in terms of performance, but it can also damage your reputation as a leader if that gets managed poorly. Part of it is we're groping around the dark, we're gonna make mistakes. Certainly I know I made plenty of them. And I would tell you that I think, based on what I've seen, there are really two big categories where I think especially new or newer leaders, I think really struggle. And that is mismanaging relationships and focusing on the wrong things. So avoiding the two biggest mistakes. So mismanaging relationships, I mean, obviously nobody sets out to mismanage relationships, but yet, if we're really honest, you know, who here hasn't mismanaged a relationship, either professionally or personally? I mean, we all are probably guilty of that to some degree or another. And I think that this mismanagement of relationship is really rooted in what I call sort of a naive, almost childlike view of leadership. And that is, well, because I'm the CEO, I'm the president, people are supposed to listen to me. When I give orders, you know, they're supposed to execute those orders. I love this cartoon because it really kind of illustrates this view of things. You know, you got this exhausted executive collapsing in his chair, and he's having this very pleasant dream. And in the dream, he's thinking, you know, Smithers is going to fix operations, Digby is going to sort out sales, Rutherford will improve R&D, and Bradford will charm the regulators. You know, he's just, you know, all his wishes are being executed flawlessly. I have 5 children. When I was early in my career, I'd come home often complaining about, you know, somebody that was giving me fits at work. And usually one of the kids would pipe up and they'd say, Dad, I don't understand. Aren't you the boss of everybody? Don't they have to listen to you? You know, and I think we, as honestly, when we're starting out in this leadership thing, we kind of think that way. That, you know, that really, if they just listen to the benevolent dictator, things are just going to go so much better. Right? But it really, unfortunately, doesn't go that way. I think to make you feel a little bit better, I would say it's really not your fault that you think that way. If I'm describing something familiar to you, I see some heads nodding out there. I'd say this really is rooted in the way that we're trained through the academic world. You know, if you've been to university, you know, what's the formula for success? You know, study the material, I show up on test day, I provide the right answer to the right question at the right time, I get the grade, I move on to the next thing. And that's what they're training you to do, is to come up with the right answer at the right time. Nowhere in there do you have to sell your answer. Right? I can't think of a professor that ever asked me to sit down and defend and explain why I thought the answer was 6 and not 7. You don't have to worry about a competitor in the classroom that's going to steal your work and steal your answer. You don't have to worry about someone trying to undermine your test score, right? I mean, none of that is you're being trained to do at all. And so you're thinking at a subconscious level, because you've been at this academic thing for so long, that it's all about getting the right answer, and that everything else will be self-evident thereafter. And that's really just, sadly, not how it works. Not at all. I mean, you really have to be focused on this. I don't think I became aware of this till I was probably in my 30s. Slow learner, guilty as charged. But I was very much in the I'm going to be right mode. I want to be the smartest guy in the room. I want to come up with the best answers, and then I'll just dazzle people with my brilliant ideas. And in leadership, you know, I found that was a formula for heartache and problem. I did go to a leadership program, you know, at that time, and the one thing that really helped me was there was an industrial psychologist there, and I had a session with him, and he was looking at some of my information, and he asked me this question that really changed the way I thought about leadership. And he said to me, Bob, do you want to be right, or do you want to be effective? And honestly, at that point in time, I looked at him and I thought, I'm thinking to myself, I thought those were the same things. You know? And the fact that he's asking me this question would suggest to me that maybe they're not, okay? And this really got me to stop and really think about what I was doing. Instead of me complaining about how I was being wrong, and, you know, look, poor me, I started thinking, realizing maybe I had a hand in this, and I needed to change the way I thought and the way I did things. And what he really did is he introduced me into the world of understanding about power and influence. And I don't know if any of you have read any books on power and influence. Of course, this is one of the slides I kind of had to cut out of the talk today because it just took me too long. I mean, I could spend days talking about power and influence, but he got me introduced to this idea of what power bases are all like, how you develop influencing strategies. And he kind of really got me into this idea that you're not going to physically change the way people think about things. You know? probably unlikely you're gonna have that kind of influence over people. So what you have to do is understand how people are wired, how they think about things, and then use that skill inside your organization. Now, I would tell you that most people in the business world, they fundamentally understand this idea when they're dealing with people outside the organization. When they're dealing with clients, they're dealing with influencers, government regulators, they're not trying to change those people. They're trying to maneuver them, they're trying to manage them. They're using, whether they mean to or not, they're using power and influence techniques there. But some reason when we get inside the organization, we fail to do that, especially as leaders. We just kind of want to roll over things and get people to do, like the guy on the cartoon, right? So, unfortunately, I don't have enough time to really unpack all the power and influence, but there's a lot of great books out there. One of the ones I like is by an author named John Potter. John's a Harvard professor. I think he's still active in Harvard, and I know for years and years and years, if you went to study business at Harvard, his class on power and influence was the most popular class to get into. His book he wrote was in the 70s and 80s, so the examples are a little bit dated in there, but the truths that he has in there are still quite accurate and very valuable today. And I would tell you that investing some time reading some information on that will make you a better leader. It will make you want to be effective and less focused on trying to be right. And in the process of doing that, I think what you'll discover is you're suddenly managing relationships better. And that will improve your organization. Yes, sir?
Sorry, Bob, what's the name of the book?
It's actually cleverly called Power and Influence. The next big mistake, I think, is this whole area of focusing on the wrong things. And again, this is not entirely the CEO's fault. There's two sort of driving forces that cause us to get off track. And in a minute, I got a slide where I'm going to talk to you about what I would argue are the things that the organizational leader should be focusing on. But the tyranny of the urgent has a way of rearing its ugly head, and suddenly you find yourself doing none of the things that are on that list if you're not careful. So the first reason I think this happens is you get pulled into things out of what I'll call kind of necessity. You see that things that should be being done by others or could be done by others, they're not being done. They're not being done well. And again, keep in mind, the reason you got promoted to a senior level position was because you were exceptional at some lower or intermediate level tasks. So when you see your organization struggling, it's human nature to want to step in there and say, I can help them, I can make this better, I can solve this problem, I can help implement that task, because I don't want to see my organization struggling. And you tell yourself, this is going to make things better. And in the short run, it does. But in the long run, you're hurting your organization because these things that we're going to talk about in a minute are not getting done. Because there is no one else to do this other list except you. That's the problem, okay? And then there's just the possibility you might be a victim of upward delegation. I can think throughout my career, there were 3 or 4 very crafty, sly people that really knew how to push my buttons and get me to gladly take on their tasks, because they either didn't want to do it, they didn't know how to do it, or they didn't want to simply be responsible for it. And I was only too happy to jump in and take on that responsibility. You have to be on guard for that. You have to be looking at the fact that there's just the same person that's figuring out how to delegate their job to you, okay? And then lastly, there's just kind of garden variety micromanaging. And, sometimes we're kind of wired that way, where we see a better way of doing it. We're just, back in we're trying to be right mode, and we're literally looking over people's shoulder, telling them exactly what we want them to do, how we want to do it. And of course, they're not really learning anything in that process. They're just sort of an extension of our hands and feet. The other big reason why I think we sometimes get off into the wrong things is simply, again, human nature. People like to do what they love to do. And if you were coming through the organization, you were an exceptional salesperson, you were a fantastic project manager, you were a great technical expert. There's just part of you love doing that. You're good at it. That's why you're good at it. And so you can succumb to that temptation to want to jump back in and provide your expertise. Or maybe you've got clients that miss you in that role, and they're asking you to get in and do something, right? So those are things that can cause you to get off track. So what are the things that we should be doing? And this is my short list for it. I wouldn't suggest to you that it's an exhaustive list, but I think it's the big ticket items. Developing the strategy and the vision for the organization. You have to do that. Now you can get help. You can hire consultants You can bring in part of your team to help you that. But your organization wants to hear from you on this topic. They don't want to hear from an outside consultant. They don't want to hear from somebody lower down in the organization. They want to know that you believe this. They want you to be able to explain, this is the direction we're going in. We're all going together. When we get there, this is what's going to happen. This is why this is going to be better. You've got to deliver that compelling vision, and they need to look in your eyes and believe that you believe it, right? And if they don't see that coming out of there, that message is going to fall flat. So in my view, and that takes time. That's not just a one-time conversation, you know. I can think about how many times I was coaching leaders, they'd sit there and say, well, I already told them about this. Okay, well, people leak. They don't hold the information. So you've got to be in a mode where you are delivering this message. You can never get tired of delivering these messages. Okay, that's part and parcel with this assignment as the CEO or president of your organization. The second big thing is focusing on organization culture. I'm not going to beat this one too hard right now because I've got a whole other set of slides and I'll go through that. But again, you as the senior leader have got to set that environment where you're going to get a positive, valuable organizational culture to flourish. Again, you can delegate some aspects of that, ask for help, but you've got to set that course. And with that, the organization wants you to set that course. They don't want to hear from others on this. Deciding on the market positioning and the market differentiators, assuming you're pursuing a market differentiation strategy, needs to come from the top of the house. You can delegate a lot of the implementation of this, but deciding how are we going to position ourselves vis-a-vis all of our competitors for our various market verticals and our various market products and services that we're going to offer to certain client types. That's a decision you have to make because it's very strategic and it makes a big difference on how the organization is going to perform. Your market differentiators, you know, you've got to meaningfully differentiate yourself in the market and you have to make those decisions about that and then communicate these ideas again repeatedly to the organization because they lose sight of it if you don't keep that messaging going. And they want to hear from you about those topics. They don't want to hear from somebody else. This next one you might think is a mistake, onboarding new staff. Anybody here think that's a mistake? Oh, come on. A lot of organizations treat onboarding as really kind of an administrative task. You know, you're a new hire, you come in, here's how you get your benefits, here's how you fill out your timesheet, here's how you use this software. I mean, those are all important topics to discuss, for sure. But you're wasting a huge opportunity. You know, when your human capital gets to you, most of them have really already had so many life experiences that, you know, their attitudes, their character, who they really are as a person has already been formed. You know, you're not going to change that in any material way. But studies have been done that show there are certain milestones in a person's life where people might be open to some new messaging and take on some new traits and attitudes and habits. And those big milestones aren't surprising. When you get married, you start having family, you have some kind of a significant health challenge in your life, or starting a new job. So to me, when I was running an organization, I insisted on being the keynote speaker for every onboarding class that came in. And I would spend a minimum of 2 to 3 hours going through a lot of this material right here with the new hires coming in because I wanted them to hear from me right out of the gate. I wanted to harness that excitement and enthusiasm. And I wanted to confirm to them that they made an excellent decision in joining my organization. And what I was really doing in that is I was inviting them to join me in the pursuit of being excellence. And I wanted to feel that excitement in them, and I wanted them to be genuinely excited about what was going on. So many organizations, they waste the opportunity by putting them to sleep with bureaucracy. And you've wasted that opportunity. You're not going to get that chance for day one excitement again. Or what they'll do is they'll hand the task off to somebody else. Billy and Susie will show you the ropes. Well, what ropes are Billy and Susie going to show them? Are they going to be as convincing about our strategy, our culture, our market differentiators, our core values, our business model? Can they sell that as well as I can as the CEO? No, they can't. And there is a good possibility that some of them will sit there and say, well, you know, Bob gets pretty excited about this culture stuff, but you can just kind of ignore that in a few days and just put your head down and you'll be fine. I mean, they can undermine everything you're trying to do. So no, you need to be involved in this. And this takes time. You've got to develop this talk. You've got to perfect it, you've got to deliver it, and you have to be available when those classes come in so you can deliver that messaging. Change management. This is really more around the idea of how change management is done rather than the implementation. You can delegate a lot of change management tasks through the organization or bring outside parties in. You don't need to be involved in that, but you need to set the tone as to how change management is going to be effectuated. And I've got a slide a little later, I'll unpack that a little bit more. But there is a strategic opportunity if you do this well, and it's worth it. So, but again, the organization wants to know that you're on point, you're involved in this, you care about this, you believe these changes are going to make a better organization. They've got to hear that from you. And then developing a business model and selling that business model. You know, to me, a business model is just kind of a shorthand way of thinking about how the organization wins, how it loses, but you use it as a tool so you can get alignment through the organization. It's a very powerful concept. My guess is most of you, if you're experienced with the company you're at, you've got a business model in your head that explains everything. The problem is, it's in your head. And you need to get it down on a piece of paper, and you need to be able to use this in a way where you can convince and use this to sell your business model throughout the organization. Because you need everybody deputized to make decisions and help drive the business forward aligned with that model, not groping around confused because they're not quite sure how the organization succeeds and fails. And then developing senior staff. Certainly you can send your senior staff to training classes. They can be quite valuable. But I would tell you that the one-on-one and group mentoring needs to come from the senior leader. Your senior team needs to believe you care enough about them that you're willing to invest your time in their development. And you should have a very selfish reason for wanting to do that. You need those folks in the same boat with you, rowing in the same direction. And they aren't going to do that unless they understand how you operate, how you make decisions, and you're basically giving them a show and tell session so that they can emulate in their own way how to do that. I used to call it rewinding the tape. So I would get with an individual that was on my senior team. They knew these coaching sessions were coming by this time. And what I'd do is I'd sit down with them and I'd say, look, let me go back. I want to show you about why I did this solution the way that I did. Here's what I was thinking about. Here's the information I was based on. Here's why I did it this way instead of doing it that way. Here's how I maneuvered these three people that were dead set against this, and I got them on board to help us implement this. Right? I was rewinding the tape. And I can't think of one time where a senior part of my team did not sit there and say they loved those sessions. Because it was like pulling back the curtain, and they began to understand, wow, there's more to this leadership thing than I realized. And then they realized I could do that. They could see themselves in that role, carrying that out. Obviously I cared about these people, I wanted them to do better, but I was also selfish about that, because if I've got them evangelized properly, and they're out there now carrying it out the way that I like to do it, that's a great value. It's a leverage model, right? Instead of just one person doing it, I got a dozen people doing it, right? So you've got to carve out the time to do this. And you can't do this if you're doing all those things on the other list, right? And that's why these are huge mistakes, because this is, I used to tell my teams, if we make a mistake on a project, we lose money on a client, okay, so be it, it happens. That's not the biggest sin. The biggest sin is wasting your time, because I can't create more time. I can always make more money, but I can't make more time. So when these hours ship out and we didn't do the right thing, you can't get them back. So you have to guard them like the gold that they are. Okay, so developing a strong leadership brand, I think is a very important concept. I don't know if you've thought about a leadership brand. If you sit there and think, I know what my leadership brand is, I guarantee you've got one. People have got very definitive opinions about who you are, how you do things. If you're not quite sure what yours is, find somebody you trust and ask them. They'll tell you the truth. Believe me, there's incredible opinions throughout your organization. Maybe what they're saying about it is exactly what you would want as a legacy. Maybe there's some aspects about that you wish were different, but you've got it. And I think there's really 4 aspects about this that I think can really drive this. The first is authentic servant leadership, and again, this is something I unpack in more detail in the book. But when I'm coaching executives, I would say there's really two broad categories of servant leaders. Again, there's like power and influence, there's at least hundreds of books written on servant leadership that you can tap into. But I think the first one is somebody who sees themselves authentically as a servant first, and then they happen to be doing leadership second. And then there's the reverse, people that see themselves first and foremost as a leader, and if I have to do this servant thing, I can, right? And clearly those are not the same people. They're not motivated by the same thing. They're not trying, in that way the same thing. And I think at times they can appear like they're similar, but I would tell you that when you face conflict and stress and you put those leaders under that, you're going to get very different reactions from those people. They're not the same. Obviously, I'm advocating for the first. I think that's really the most valuable way to really become a leader that people want to follow. Because I think a lot of this is genuinely wanting to bring out the very best in the people that you're leading. Again, I think you could do it for humanistic reasons. I just want to see my people improve, but also for selfish reasons. I mean, it makes your job easier if you've got people really functioning and you're getting the very best out of their capabilities and talents and experiences. The second thing is I like to see leaders function where they're more of the catalyst for change, not the object of the change. When I'm doing coaching, I like to use kind of actually a food analogy. Okay, so the food is, in the summertime, I really enjoy eating, corn on the cob. But it doesn't really taste right unless it's got butter and salt on it. But I can't think of ever a time when somebody ate a good piece of corn on the cob with barbecue and they said, that's great butter, that's great salt. No one says that. They compliment the corn. And I think that that's what true servant leadership is really about, is the idea that I'm going to help facilitate things. I want there to be sort of at a subconscious level, a recognition that things go better when I'm in the room. But it's not overtly because of me. I'm not doing it to draw the attention to me. I want the attention to be on the participants, the people that are doing the heavy lifting, right? I want them to feel that pride. I want them to feel that ownership in what's going on. I don't want them to sit back and say, thank God Bob was there. We would never figure this out without him. I mean, that's crippling the organization. That's not developing your people, right? So you got to put your ego aside and you got to look at this and say, I want the team. I want to be the butter. I want to be the salt. I'm not going to be the corn. You have to be okay with that. And then last but not least, being a skilled, active listener. Not surprisingly, people want their opinions to matter. They want to have a say in what's going on, and they'd like to know that their opinion registered before you made your decision. Okay? So sometimes you're spending time hearing things that really isn't going to help you, but the active listening part, going through that process, is building followership. People want to follow, even if you go back and say, it's a great idea, Bill, but I can't do that for this reason. At least they know you heard them. And they're going to remember that. And that's what they're going to talk about when they talk about your brand as a leader. Not that you were large and in charge, but that you listened and you cared. And it costs you very little to do that, except your time. When I was running organizations, I loved using questions. I almost kind of wish someone was here from one of my organizations because they would tell you, Bob will wear you out with questions. But I think there's a real value and a strategic insight for using questions as opposed to using directives. I used to say that I felt like I spent half my time walking around the organization asking questions I already knew the answers to. Okay? So in that case, I wasn't really necessarily trying to pursue new information, although sometimes that would happen. I would get surprised and learn something I didn't know. What I was really trying to do is find out, is my messaging getting through? Do people understand our culture? Do they understand our strategy? Do they understand our core values? Do they understand our business model? Can they play that back to me? Or are they just sitting there locked up like a deer in the headlights and have no idea what I'm talking about? Right? That's valuable information for a leader to know. If your messaging is not getting out, you got to change things up, right? No point continuing to use what I was using. I got to do something different to get through. It also avoids interjecting bias into your discussion. If I as a leader walk in and say, hey, I think we ought to open an office in Boston for these 5 reasons, It takes a lot of guts for somebody lower in the organization to stand and say, Bob, I think it's a terrible idea. You know, they're probably gonna go, okay. So I've closed that off. I haven't learned anything. But if I walk in and I say, hey, I was thinking about Boston the other day. Anybody been there? Anybody have any opinions about Boston? I mean, I'm gonna get a completely different discussion. I'm gonna get a dialogue. And in the process of doing that, I'm building followership. And that's very valuable. It's something I can leverage in the future. I also find that asking questions causes subordinates to be more engaged and think strategically. You know, when I would come in for a set of meetings, as I said, they all knew questions were coming. They had to prep. They had to prep. They had to spend time and think about what's he going to ask me about, what was in his last newsletter? Okay, I got to get ready. He's going to talk about this, you know. And so they're much more engaged versus if you show up and you're just delivering a sermon, I can just sit there and listen and say amen occasionally, and that's all I've got to do. There's no prep. I'm a participant versus an audience. Big difference. You want participants. You can't afford to have people sitting on the stands eating popcorn, watching what you're doing. You need them in the game. And that questions help you do that. I think it also helps them build strategic thinking capabilities, because the really sharp ones, they start anticipating what the next thing's going to happen. They're no longer just trying to get ready. They're trying to run alongside of you. They're trying to run ahead of you. And that's where you can really begin to unlock some incredible value for your organization and see some fantastic growth. And then I think, you know, obviously it sends the message the boss is open to input. And again, I think that's something folks want to hear. Problem solving in an organization, I would say all the organizations I ran, I never had to teach a management team how to identify process improvements. It's like they just are wired. They know there's a problem, we're going to do root cause analysis, here's the 6 things we can do. They're all locked in on process. I never had to coach them, ever. I can think of one time. The problem is, not every problem is entirely a process problem. Many of them have cultural components to them. And what happens if you try to apply a process solution to a culture problem? It doesn't work. You all know that. It does not work. It will fail, or it will not produce the level of results that you were hoping for. You know, the old saying is, if your management team, all they have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And that's what they gotta do. So your job as the CEO is to bring in this idea of, is there a cultural component? Again, it's using a question, but I like to ask them, is this a culture problem or a process problem? Did you consider the cultural attributes then? Explain to me in your solution how you're going to address the cultural components. And usually what happened is they would have to go away, rework their process solution to include some cultural attributes. And then as a result of that, we came up with better solutions because of that, almost always. Right? But if you don't play this role of the curator of the culture question, it's not going to happen in the organization. And then turning change into a strategic asset is again part of, I think, a brand you can cultivate as your leadership brand. If you ask most people how they feel about change, you know, they'll tell you things like, oh, change is hard, change is painful, change is uncomfortable, I really hate change. But at the same time, you ask the very same people, I'm going to make you do the same thing every day for the next 30 years. What will they say? Oh my God, I'm bored, I can't do that, it's terrible, I would never do that. Oh. So human beings are capable of holding these disparate ideas in their mind at the same time. They can hate change and they can be fear of boredom. I love this cartoon. It's a young guy getting interviewed for a job, and the recruiter says, so let me get this straight. You were bored at your last job because you did the same thing every day, but you're deathly afraid of change. Yeah, that's the human condition that we're in. Now, rather than look at that and think, well, that's silly, what I looked at it as, that's an opportunity. Because I think what this is really telling me is, people don't hate change. They hate badly done change. They want change. They want to improve. They don't want to be doing the same thing. And it's up to me as the leader of the organization to facilitate a change management program in a way where I can turn this into a strategic strength for the organization. Before you tell me it can't be done, I can tell you, not only it can be done, I've seen it done. I've done it several times, where people are excited about change. They're looking forward to it. And there's a couple of things, again, the book goes through more on this. I don't have time to unpack all that today, but two concepts I just want to tease out. One is the idea of building organizational momentum. The sequence in which you go about doing problem solving matters immensely. When you are a new leader, a lot of times you come in and what's the temptation? What's the biggest problem? I'm going to go take care of that. But are you really ready to go take care of that? Do you have the resources? Do you have the knowledge? And of course, what happens if I fail right out of the gate? What is the brand, the leadership brand I just cemented in my organization's mind? Don't get involved with his change management. They fall flat. Not a good idea. Unless your organization is in imminent peril, thankfully most are not, you have the ability to pick and choose. And I would suggest to you that it's much smarter to sequence your attack on changing whatever it is that needs to be changed in the organization in a way where you're focusing on things that you have a high degree of confidence that you know how to fix, you have the resources in place to do it, you've got the ready-made solution. Why? Because if that will produce materially better change for everybody in the organization, you're building momentum, you're building goodwill. And people are going to get out of the stands and they're going to want to get into the game. Why? Because people want to be associated with what's successful. It's part of human nature. Gosh, the last time I sat on the sidelines, I didn't get involved. Look what they did. Look at the change. Look at the credit they did. Next time this comes up, next time he's got an idea for change, I'm in. Seeing it happen. And you can, again, build yourself a fantastic leverage model, right? But you gotta think about the timing. What goes first? What goes second? What goes third? And don't just blindly stumble into change management, right? And obviously, you need the tools, you need the resources, you need to know how to carry those out. But I think you're gonna find that there is a subset of your changes that you feel supremely confident about being able to do and do well. Another concept we like to call crawl, walk, run, kind of just really a piloting idea. And this is great for more complex problems you have to solve. And what we did is we made this very apparent to the organization that we were going to use crawl, walk, run to get things done. And what you can do if you do this right is you can get people to a point where they're actually competing to be part of the pilots. Because again, there's a prestige associated with being part of something successful, and a lot of times those folks want to be able to help author the solution. You know, most organizations, for really complex problems that have to be solved, it's almost impossible to come up, you know, sort of in the ivory tower, you know, laboratory, the perfect solution right out of the gate. You know, there's just unintended consequences. There are things, no matter how smart your team is, they're gonna miss. But you can pilot these things in a way in a controlled environment. It's understood it's a learning environment, so it's not, the expectations are different for the organization. And then, of course, when you get it ready for prime time, now I've got champions ready to go carry it out. You know, they've helped me develop it, and they're going to go out and advocate and sell that to the organization, right? And the process, you know, an engagement plan is a key part of this, being able to go out and communicate in an unfiltered way to your organization. You know, again, my book, I'll go through some examples of how to do that, but you know, being able to go out there and deliver messages in a way where they're not being filtered by the various levels of management is very important. And you need to develop those as part of your change management strategy. And I've seen situations where we had, you know, quiddity was one of them. There was a massive amount of change that our organization had to go through over 3 years. But I can tell you that we started out, everybody petrified, afraid of change. I hate change, I don't want to be involved in change. I mean, there was a lot of anxiety. And by the time we were 2/3 of the way through that change, people were coming to me and they were challenging me. What's the next set of changes we're going through? We love the innovations that are happening. What's the next thing we're going to do? I mean, it was amazing to see that sort of transformation in their thought process. But think about how valuable that would be to your organization if you had your employee base challenging you to make the next innovation set of changes. It'd be incredible. What couldn't you do? Okay, so that's kind of leading with purpose, organizational culture. Topic number 2 today. You know, this is a topic where there's a lot written about it. If you'd asked me 15, 20 years ago about my views on culture, you know, I probably would have said something like, yeah, I think it's probably important, but it's kind of one of these squishy, intangible ideas. I'm not sure how you measure it. I don't know, you know, can I really see actual improvement if I spend time on this? And probably just kind of drifted off the conversation at that point. In the book, I sort of talk about sort of my journey on this, or how I became kind of a culture convert, and there's nothing worse than a convert, I'll tell you that. But you know, I really got to the point where I understood there was a lot of power and value in this. And I would tell you that I think if it's done correctly, it can not only impact your market positioning, your brand, it absolutely will affect your recruiting, your retention. You can really dynamically change your client base, not only in terms of growth rates, but also in terms of the quality of your clients. And it will absolutely affect your financial performance. The key thing, just cutting to the chase, is that culture, if you are focusing on differentiation in particular, it can really serve as the basis for your strategy, okay? If you read anything about business strategy from, you know, say like a Michael Porter or something like that, you know, they'll typically tell you that there's really two broad categories of strategy. There's cost leadership and there's market differentiation. So examples, the everyday examples in maybe the retail space, you know, a cost leadership company would be somebody like Walmart, right? I mean, you know, they're famously known for being tough on their vendors. You know, if you walk into their stores, everything just screams low price. You know, they're about volume. They're trying to get product in and off the shelf as quick as they can. You know, lots of checkout lines. Some of the stores are open 24 hours a day. If you go talk to an employee there about, you want to know something about a product, they know where it is, they know what the price is, but you know, they're not training people to be product experts. You contrast that with a differentiation example, retail, I'd say Nordstrom's comes to my mind. Nobody would confuse Nordstrom's and Walmart, although they're both retailers, right? Nordstrom's is really, they're not trying to be the lowest cost. You know, I always found sometimes when I was shopping in there, I struggled to find a checkout. I wasn't quite sure who was going to take my money or where they were at. You know, they may have somebody playing a grand piano in the foyer. You step into the carpet, your feet sink. It's not about price. It's being different. And what Porter will tell you, for people like him, is that the holy grail of this is what they call sustained competitive advantage. What you're really trying to do is develop something in the marketplace that your competition cannot easily replicate. And I think that's where culture really fits in, because culture is largely driven by the employees that are working for your firm. Whatever culture you have today, maybe you have more than one culture in your organization, but I can assure you that is being driven by what your staff is doing. And they're taking leads from you and from your senior team, for sure. You set the environment, they carry it out and make it authentic. That's how it works with culture. That's what I know. And so as a result of that, if a competitor wanted to replicate your culture, they're going to struggle because they don't have your employees and they don't have your leadership team. I learned all this by really going to Southwest Airlines. They taught me everything I know about culture. They're fantastic in that way, and they are very much a culture-first organization, top and bottom. Does anybody here remember in the early 2000s there was the United Airlines spun up a competitor to Southwest? Does anybody remember? It's called TED Airlines. Anybody ever fly on TED? No, nobody did. They were out of business in like 2 to 3 years. And TED is like the last 3 letters of United. But United made the classic mistake. They thought it was all about the process, the equipment. And they thought they could program a Southwest knockoff without the Southwest culture. So what did they do? They got the planes Southwest flew. They routed them the way Southwest did. They boarded passengers the way. They had served the same snacks and drinks. They put their flight attendants in Southwest style uniforms. But they were still United employees, okay? And so you got United level service on a Southwest platform, and it failed. I think within 3 years they were out of business. That's an example, it's a real world example of somebody who tried to replicate culture as a business strategy and failed miserably. So I'm quite confident you can go out there. When I ran organizations that had culture as their corporate strategy, I mean, we had competitors trying to study us all the time. I really didn't care because I knew they couldn't replicate it, and they never did. So if you decide to pursue this as part of your differentiation strategy, you can feel pretty confident that once you perfect it, it's not going to be stolen by somebody else.
So that's why I say it is the perfect differentiation strategy. So there's kind of some good news and bad news about culture. As I said, you really can't create culture, certainly not through programs and processes. That was certainly a point Southwest made to me, and we've seen it from other folks out there in the marketplace. But you can create an environment that's conducive to curating a culture. And I think that really comes from, especially the CEO of the organization. You can sit down and decide what kind of culture you'd ideally like to have, and then you've got to work like crazy to create an environment for that to authentically develop in the organization. And I think there's 5 steps. Again, the book goes through in more detail than I can go through today, but just quickly hit them. You really have to start at the very beginning. You have to, go back and say, why do we exist? What is our purpose? What would happen if we closed our doors tomorrow? What would the market say? Would anybody notice? Would anybody care? You've got to understand that motivation for being in business. Then you have to go through and identify your core values. And when we always talk about core values, are not necessarily the full set of all values in the company, but they're the values that we used to call ever present. When I would do onboarding, I would tell our new hires, there's never going to be a time where we're going to ask you to do something that's contrary to these core values. Okay? But there are other things we value, but they're more situational. So one of the examples I was used to use in onboarding was creativity. Creativity couldn't be a core value because I never wanted to get creative accounting statements, right? So it can't be core. But you can make that distinction. We have things we value situationally, and these are core values that are ever present. And then what you want to do is go through a gaps analysis. Here's everything that we know is true about our organization today, good, bad, or ugly, system by system, process by process, core value by core value. And here's the future state. Here's what we want to be true. That is not necessarily true today. And that creates a gap. And that helps you sort of identify where you need to make your investments, where you need to set your priorities, what your communication plan needs to look like, right? Because you're not there right now, but you want to get there. And you've identified where the destination is. Then the 4th step, quite honestly, is the hardest one. It's the transition, closing up the gaps. Some of them are just simple investments you have to make. Those aren't so bad. But I will tell you that there's 2 areas in particular that are extremely painful. Around your employees that are not culturally aligned, and around clients or customers that are not culturally aligned. Because the employees that are bad employees that are not culturally aligned, those are actually pretty easy decisions to make. The problem is you get somebody who's a star performer, or so you think, but they don't buy into some of your cultural attributes. The problem is you've got to try to work them through that, but if you don't, and you keep them, what is the message that sends to the organization? Core values apply to some, but if you're really good, you can behave any way you want to. And if you do that, this whole thing will collapse like a house of cards, and you'll be back to where you were at. And then the last point, step in there, is really just the effective communication plan. Again, this is where this engagement strategy with your staff is really crucial. You need those tactics, those vehicles cultivated, perfected, so that you can deliver messages, not only about this process, but about the destination, why this is going to be better. And you need to be able to deliver that message in a way where it's not getting filtered. And then you need a way to be reinforcing these success criteria over and over and over again. Because again, as I mentioned, people leave, they lose sight of this, or you get new people coming into the organization who didn't go through the cultural alignment process. And you need to make sure that they're on board with that. Takeaways from this process of curated culture, it takes time. You're not going to do this in a matter of a couple of months. You're going to be looking at, probably a year before you start seeing some seeds of results, and it could take 2 or 3 years to really get all the way through the process. It's very important to get your senior leadership team involved early. I never wanted this just to be Bob's culture. I wanted this to be our culture, collectively. This is what we strive and aspire to be. And as I said, you've got to be prepared for these tough decisions. I guarantee you, by the time you identify what you want to be true about your culture, you will already know who your big problem children are in your organization and who your problem clients are. And you got to start thinking about it. Can I get them over the hump? Or do I need to develop something like we used to call, we had an alumni program. You know, if I can't get you through the transition, then I'm gonna introduce you to the alumni program. And we're gonna move you on, because I can't have a two-tiered system. When you're going through the transition, it's very important that you, as the CEO, be open and transparent with your staff about what's happening. Early on in these changes, I would always tell our team, look, I know we're not perfect right now today. We may never be perfect, okay? But we are aspiring to be better than we are today. We are gonna be on a journey together, and I need you to help me. I need you to hold me accountable. When we fail, and we're going to fail, don't be afraid to point that out. And as they see you take actions and see that you're genuinely interested in that, you'll get more of that feedback. First, it'll be just the few brave ones that will stick their head up. But eventually you get to a point where people, they can smell out the unauthentic person in your culture. And then last but not least, hire based on cultural fit. This is again something I learned from Southwest. I remember the CEO telling me, he said, Bob, we will not knowingly hire somebody who is not culturally aligned with our values. I don't care how good they are. He said, it's much easier for me to teach them what they know, to do their job well, take a lower level skilled person, teach them what they need to know, than it is for me to teach them how to be a Southwest employee. And that really resonated with me. So if you compromise on that, you're just creating more transition problems for yourself in the future. Or you're gonna send a message to your organization that we're not really serious about culture, right? So very important that you get that in. And this was something that most organizations, quite honestly, have to learn how to do. It's not intuitive, it's a trial and error process. We used to run sort of diagnostic sessions. We hired somebody we thought was culturally aligned, they came in, they turned out not to be. You know, again, we kind of rewind the tape. How did we get this wrong? What did we miss? And we tried to do a lot of group hiring, so it wasn't just one person's opinion. You know, we wanted a lot of people's opinions. And we gave veto power. If somebody looked and said, you know, I don't think Bob's culturally aligned, then we didn't hire him. Okay. Okay, so my last topics, I'll be quick here. I know we're probably on over time, I'm sure. Winning tactics. I want to talk a little bit about marketing. I picked marketing because I think it's one of these topics that I think it's misunderstood, even by people that hold themselves out as marketing consultants and marketing professionals. And looking at their material, a lot of times you get the impression that marketing is about getting a sale. And certainly it's part of the sales process, but in my view, and I'll admit I'm not a professional marketeer, but marketing is not about closing a sale. Marketing is about impacting the top tiers of the business development funnel. Mostly awareness, and also, you know, obviously consideration, and then what we like to call MQL, market qualified lead. That's what we want marketing to do, was to provide a warm lead for the sales team to go execute against. So they're not doing cold calling. I would suggest to you that I think there are two broad categories of marketing strategies. The first is you're probably the most familiar with is I'd say traditional interruption-based marketing. If you watch television, those ads are interruption marketing. If you're like me, you get spam email, interruption marketing, robocalls, anybody, interruption marketing. And what that message is essentially saying is, Mr. or Mrs. Prospect, stop what you're doing and pay attention to what I'm about to tell you. Yeah, people don't like that, right? Nobody here likes getting spam, robocalls, or likes ads. But that is what a lot of traditional marketing is based upon. And that's part of the reason why the hit rate on those types of programs are very low, in the low single digits. 1, 2, maybe 3% uptake you get. And the reason is because you're delivering the same message, you're delivering the same offer to the universe of prospects out there, regardless of where they are in the business development funnel. So it's not surprising that a very low percentage, you happen to hit them at the right time. Which, of course, the flip side of that means if I've got a 2% effective rate, that means 98% of what I'm doing is wasted. Which is why most people probably in this room look at it and feel like, I don't like wasting money on marketing. I don't get the return. So it's a very logical conclusion that you come to. The alternative to that is more of a digital permission-based marketing. And they function very differently. This process is really about creating awareness for your brand by providing value-added content to the marketplace. So you're providing valuable information, you're providing valuable insight to targets, okay? And what you're really trying to do in that process is get them to identify by engaging with the content. So you're using social media channels a lot of times. I realize that sometimes some client bases don't interact with social media. I get that, but that's really changing. As that population ages out, the younger folks are using social media extensively. And you can reach a lot of audience in that regard. And what you're doing is you're looking for what we call digital hand raises. They're interacting with your content, meaning they're liking the content, they're reposting the content, they're putting a comment on the content. And what they're in essence telling you is, I'm interested in what you're telling me, please tell me more. I'm giving you permission to market to me. So of course, the uptake rate on that type of interaction is going to go up much higher because they've self-selected. They're interested in what you're doing. And you can concentrate your marketing efforts accordingly. And as I said, what you're really trying to do is not sell them, you're trying to qualify a lead. You're trying to nurture an actionable relationship through your interaction. The process of this, there's definitely a CEO component to this, and then of course you got your marketing team. The CEO's role in this, again, you've got to identify the market differentiators. If you're pursuing differentiation, clearly that applies. You need to develop a mindset around what I call customer or client journeys. These are really sort of like storyboards you can literally put together. And what you're really trying to answer the question is, how do clients in different markets, different geographies, different market verticals, how do they find us? How do they decide to transact with us? And initially when you do this, it's going to be a lot of hypothesis. I think this is how it goes. I think that's how it goes. But you may not know for sure. And part of this is you can perfect this through your digital marketing campaign. But you don't need to create customer journeys, but you need to make sure that your team understands this is a deliverable. It needs to be well understood. And the reason that's important is because with the digital permission-based marketing, you can very skillfully craft messaging that's going to be more effective at each phase of that journey. So somebody who's 4 steps down the journey, you're not sending them the same message who's somebody back in step 1, right? You can do that much more effectively with digital than you can with traditional marketing. You need to make the decision as the CEO whether we're doing permission or interruption marketing. That's a decision you have to make. And then you need to do, arguably maybe one of the hardest things, identifying the marketing executive. My experience with this was they were very tough to do because I could go out and recruit, get a marketeer to come in and they understand all the lingo, they know permission marketing, they can spout it all off to me. What I found often happens is it's like a car in the ruts, they just immediately want to go back to the traditional marketing. And I can remember one company, we did the client journeys, and we found out in there that most of the clients were not using our website to transact with us. They might look at it to validate that we existed as a company, but it really played no meaningful role in qualifying leads or anybody buying from us. But yet I had professional marketeers wanting to spend untold sums of money perfecting search engine optimization. Right? Happened over and over again. It's just like, they're trained to think that way. You can't get them out of it. So I would offer you a radical idea. Don't try to get a professional marketeer. Find somebody in your organization who's got an entrepreneurial focus, who's eager to learn, and is excited about a new challenge. Put them in that role. You work alongside of them. You need to bring a consultant in to help with it. Great. But you guys together go on that journey. And I think you're going to find, first of all, the organization is going to accept that person better because they're not an outsider, they know your business. And second of all, they're going to deliver a much more focused marketing effort that's aligned with what you're trying to do for your organization. Staff engagement is very important. Obviously, the CEO needs to be involved in the marketing effort. You have to post out there or someone posts for you. But, quite honestly, if I'm the CEO of the company and I post something on social media, on LinkedIn, that says my company's great, is anybody really surprised the CEO said that? No. For God's sake, if I'm not going to say something good about us, who will? But what you really want to do is you want to encourage and make the investments in the system so that everybody in your organization has the opportunity to participate in the delivery of those messages. And there's great tools out there that make it very simple to do. You need, obviously, somebody to curate the content. You need to be out there selling that idea that you need them involved in this process, because the marketplace is going to see that far more authentic in a post from the CEO. Okay. Staff's role is pretty straightforward, curating the content. I will say, unfortunately, I sound like an old man, get off my grass, but it's hard to find people that can write. I mean, today, unfortunately, it just is. Writing isn't taught like it used to be. One source I found, if you're looking for writers, is journalists. You might have heard journalism, not the greatest industry to go into today, but those people know how to tell stories, and that's what you need. So often we would hire ex-journalists to come in, they would do the interviews for the staff, write the stories, and that would serve a lot of our content. It was very effective. And what you really want to do is this idea of our mantra was lead with value. What we're putting out there really needs to be valuable information to really get people's attention and time. And they need to be sitting there saying, I'm glad I read that piece. I'm glad I spent my time looking at that video. The staff's got to be trained to look for the digital handles when they come up, and there's a whole process of learning how to do that. And then the key thing really is around experimentation. One of the great things about permission digital marketing is it's pretty inexpensive. It's mostly just your time, unlike traditional, where you can spend tremendous amounts of money. These things are not expensive to do, and you can afford to experiment. Put some message out there, it doesn't produce the results you're looking for, no problem. Try something new. Results, again, to me, marketing is about MQL, not delivering sales. Brand awareness. Even if you fail at MQL, if you do this really effectively, you cannot help but improve the awareness of your brand. And generally, companies I work with, I find that's probably the single biggest problem they're finding out there. People just don't know they exist. How do we overcome that? This process you can evaluate and refine both your market differentiator, your client journey. You have a theory going into this as to what's going to be effective, and how this is going to work, and you're going to find out some things in there that are going to make you want to change them. And then really what you're trying to do is build followership through strategic, authentic engagement. So you want people to anticipate, what's the next thing that company's going to post? I'm looking forward to it. I can't tell you how many times I've run into something, they say, oh, you're the company that's really engaged on LinkedIn, or you're the company that's really engaged in Instagram. I see your stuff all the time. And that's music to my ears. I want to own those spaces for my market verticals. Okay, last slide. Sales management. Again, this is probably something you all are very familiar with. I'm not going to tell you too much you don't know here today. But I'm telling you, there is kind of a love-hate relationship with sales management. Those of us that are running companies, we either find we love doing it, and maybe we get too involved in it, or we hate it, we don't want anything to do with it. But I would tell you that it's awfully important to get done. You have a lot of resources tied up in your sales delivery mechanisms. Not only just the people that are doing it, but think of all the people on the receiving end, your operations, your fulfillment groups. They're depending on that sales team to deliver the clients and the projects for you, the product orders. Think through your objectives. It seems like an obvious thing, but a lot of times when I talk to people, they're like, well, I want more sales. Okay, sure, that's an objective, I agree, that's an obvious one. But what about other objectives? Am I trying to open a new geographic market? Am I trying to get into a new market vertical? Am I trying to rebalance my portfolio of products and services? Am I trying to diversify my business? Those are all also viable, important objectives that you may be expecting your sales management process to deliver for you. So you have to have those firmly in mind so you can make sure that your systems and processes are measuring more than just how much sales came out at the end of the pipeline. To do this effectively, you really have to evaluate the sales environment. And I think there's two key things here. One is, what does the sales cycle look like for your products, your services that you're vending? From the time that a sales representative first engages with the target till they write the order, is that 30 days? Is it 90 days? Is it 2.5 years? That matters. It matters immensely on how you think about this, how it has to be managed, what your processes have to entail. So you have to be intimately familiar with that. The other key thing is you have to know sort of the shape of the business development funnel. How many prospects does it take to get down to so many proposals or RFQs for consideration? How many of those have to then turn into a sale? Do I need 100 prospects to get 20 proposals to get 6 sales? That's very different than I need 10,000 proposals to get 20 to get 6. Because your effort's got to be different. That means someone's got to be engaging in the prospecting You've got to have a way of screening. Just understanding that difference immediately tells me my processes have to be different. My management has to be different. Those are not the same one size fits all. And then in doing this, you've got to carefully develop your compensation plan. If anybody here has ever lived through a comp change for a sales team, it's brutal. Even if you make it obviously better, you're going to get significant turnover. People just don't trust management. Of course, that tells us probably a lot about how they view management, right? Because they're worried somebody's got my wallet, somebody's got my purse. My livelihood's at stake. You can't blame them for being nervous about that. So you got to spend the time to get this right on the front end and not be messing around with it, because you're gonna cause your organization a lot of pain and suffering. And so you've got to think about the objectives. You know, if I'm trying to diversify my business, then my comp model has got to create rewards for the successful execution of that diversification objective. Likewise, if the sales cycle is very, very short, I can afford to have a low base pay, high variable pay. If the sales cycle is very long and you try to do that, you will have people who will quit on you left and right because they will starve you down in that process. And then like I said, you got to think about the funnel shape. Managing the sales process, you don't have to do that. You have to manage, I should say managing the managers of the sales process. You got to manage the managers. I've seen many organizations where they just kind of dump that on whoever the professionals that's doing that. And it's just kind of, if you have a problem, call me, but they're really calling, I don't really want to be involved in it. Just give me the results. Give me the fresh meat. I don't care how you do it. That's a disaster. Because they're not going to manage based on these objectives, this environment that we talked about, and you're probably going to have an ineffective comp model. So you got to be involved in that, and you got to make sure that those individuals know you care deeply about this, and you're expecting all of the objectives to be hit, not just your sales. Okay? With that, I'm done. I'm sorry I ran over, I apologize. But, yes, sir.
You talked about hiring for culture. What are some good questions that you would ask to determine in an hour-long interview if that was good?
So the question was, what questions would I ask for hiring for culture? I think it kind of depends on whether you're talking about experienced hires or if you're talking about campus hiring. Start with campus hiring, it's a little bit easier. One of the things we learned, we sort of did as we were looking at this cultural definition process at the beginning. One of the things we discovered early on was that the leaders of a particular company I was managing at that time all came out of sort of, I call kind of traditional blue collar families. You know, these were not trust babies that were running our company. These were people that probably worked their way through school, so on and so forth. We found that in that particular organization, that was an indicator of future success for hires out of college. So we stopped asking about GPA, we stopped asking about clubs they were in, we started asking what their parents did. Okay, because that gave us some idea of, you know, what was being formed into their character at a very early age. For experienced hires, what I like to do is really get them to open up and engage with me about the transitions between their jobs. What drove them to move from one place to another? You know, and if you're hearing like, well, you know, I left there because the word wasn't understood and I didn't feel valued, and, you know, okay, well, if you get enough of those, and there might be an isolated one where that's valid, but if that's happening over and over again, you know, you're probably going to bring that dynamic right to your business. And my guess would be that's not a desirable culture you're looking for. So part of it, I think, is once you know what the attributes are that you're looking for, then you need to craft questions to try to go after that. So if it's around accountability, like one of the core values we had at Quinity was accountability, because you know sometimes you can get organizations, especially where you got multi-faceted teams working on projects. Everybody wants to go like this when something goes off the rails, and that's not really effective. So part of it is, you know, asking questions about when were times they had to be accountable to. So it's just really that practical. One of the things I like to do is use more panel. So I didn't like the daisy chain interviews because one, it takes up a lot of time for the candidate, and they may get the same questions over and over again. If it was a senior level position we were recruiting for, a lot of times we would kind of develop areas of question. You know, I'm going to handle this part. She's going to handle this part, he's going to take, you know, we kind of take leads in those areas. And then at the end, we'd sit down and say, tell me what you saw. It'd be amazing how people see different things in that process. So yeah, we're looking for that point where everybody comes back and everybody's saying, yes, this is a winner. And I'd say initially we were not great at that, but we got to a point where I'd say probably about 80% we hit on, but still 20% you miss on. So if people are really skilled, you know, they can BS you for an interview, right? It's a great question, thank you.
So, Bob, I remember a number of years ago, you and I had lunch and you were talking about, you made a statement and you said, every time I let someone go who's putting points on the board, but not living our values, that sends a reinforcing message through the organization. Can you talk about that a little bit more?
So I haven't heard the question, but Rob is reminding me of some conversations he and I had where I would talk about every time I let go of somebody that was perceived to be a high performer who was not culturally aligned, that it sort of put points on the board, and it was the term we used, but just kind of reinforced the idea of our commitment to culture, okay? So there's a couple examples I can give. I want to be careful that I don't accidentally identify anybody by name. But you know, at Quiddity in particular, this happened quite often. We had people that had grown up in the company, they'd been there through their entire career, they'd been allowed to do whatever they wanted to do. And some of them were, you know, they had loyal followings, both clients and employees, but they were definitely not culturally aligned. And every time you let somebody like that go, of course, you know, the HR professionals will always tell you, you know, say very little because you don't want to get into a lawsuit over terminating somebody. But we found we never had to. The organization instinctively knew, you know, if we let Bill Smith, I don't think it was Bill Smith was working there, but if Bill Smith got let go, the organizational water cooler network immediately knew Bill was not aligned culturally. That's why, because they knew he had a great book of business. We were making money on him. It wasn't that, so they were able to quickly deduce. And what would happen out of that is people at lower levels than the individual terminated would quickly conclude, well, if they'll let that person go for not being culturally aligned, you know, what chance do I have? You know, and so it really does send a very powerful message. One of the individuals that got let go of one of the companies was a son of a founder. You know, that sends a very powerful message, you know, and you know, that you're not going to be treated differently than everybody else. Some of this gets into, you know, the power and influence discussion. One of the early things I did was kind of a small decision, but it really sent an impactful message. Was at Quiddity, was I got rid of all the assigned parking spots. You know, because there was one for me, one for a bunch of other people that thought they were important when I got there. And so I got rid of those. And, you know, and that was kind of what, you know, Cotter would say was a symbolic power statement. And what it really symbolically was saying was, I'm not any different than everybody else that's here. I can walk. I probably need to exercise more than the young people coming in here. So, you know, that was a way for me to communicate to everybody very rapidly about who we are and what we value without me having to have a bunch of individual conversations. So it's not just determinations that I think have that symbolic value. I think there's a lot of things that fall into that category that you can do. Great question. Yes, sir.
You mentioned the importance of onboarding and the involvement in onboarding. Can you just go into how do you continue that on in terms of maybe performance reviews? Like, how do you see performance reviews? So basically, folks who come in the organization on onboarding, how do you continue that for the next however many years?
Yeah, I think it's more relevant on not so much even the onboarding or certainly not the performance evaluations. It's really around the business model. Is really what it is. So therefore, it intersects with onboarding because I always talk about the business model. So what the objective in that regard is to get the employees to look at this and say, here's my personal success criteria, and here's how this is going to develop my career. And as a result, if I do this well, the company's going to prosper right along with that. Right? So one of the things we did, like at Quiddity, was we identified 4 success pillars, I think is what we call them. And that was part of the onboarding process, and I tell them right up front. You know, if you're interested in coming in, and one day you aspire to be a partner in this firm, here are the 4 things that we value in particular that's gonna do that. The 4 were helping us to win work, helping us to win recruits, strategic, operational, technical excellence, and strategic significance. So strategic significance might be, we opened a new office in Dallas, and you were hired to go up there and help us run that office, right? So what we would tell people is, we don't expect you to be exceptional in all those areas. I mean, but it really would be great if you were excellent in 1 or 2, and were very helpful in a couple others. That puts you on a path for success. And so, you know, frankly, I don't really like, probably heresy, I'm sorry, but I don't really like performance evaluations. I just think they tend to annoy the hell out of people, and they don't really provide the value that people think they are. What I would rather do is just have what we implemented, were really just kind of periodic check-ins. Here's how you're doing against your goals. Here's how you're doing against your objectives. Here's, you know, are you on path to be successful, strategically aligned, or are you not? And just have, you know, we used to call them adult conversations. And usually, people know that. They know whether they're aligned or not. They know whether they're on path or not. And your job as the manager is to give them examples of what you're doing well, what you're not doing well. This was disappointing. Here's why we need this as opposed to that. You know, a little bit like, you like your big brother. Here's what he's doing. Here's what you need to do. The evaluations, I think a lot of times, they force you into conversations that may not be that relevant for that particular individual. But you can still document these you know, check-ins, but just don't, I never liked the evaluations. Great question, thank you. Yes, sir.
So you talked a little bit about mapping out the customer journey and understanding that. How do you evolve that, or what's your process evolving that from a hypothesis more into a really mapping of actual customer journey?
Yeah, so a lot of times we would use examples to do that. So one of the things, especially if I was new coming in as a leader, I would do extensive interviews. When I got to Quiddity, I think we had 345 employees. I bet I interviewed 100 of them. And I'll tell you, there's some key things here. I made a point when I do the interview, they were always one-on-one. I didn't do a phone call or send them a survey. I scheduled time, came to see them. So what message, about power and influence, what message does that send? I'm coming to see you. You're important, right? I would make a big show of having a notepad, and I would take notes, everything they would tell me. What message does that send? I care enough about what you're saying to record it. Now, there's also a benefit for me because, you know, my memory sometimes isn't that great. And if I misquote you later, I want to be able to go back and say, well, you know, back then you told me this, now you're telling me something different, right? So in the process of doing that, though, you start learning what's good, bad, and ugly about the business. Do the same thing with your clients. I probably interviewed 30, and I let the company cherry pick the 30 best clients we had, and I met with them. Same thing. And I would ask them, tell me how you got it. So they would basically lay out a hypothesis about the journey right there. So I got that as a byproduct of getting information about what we were doing well. So I had 2 purposes in that way. They're not perfect because a lot of times they don't know. I mean, I don't know, just you did something for me back when and it worked, so I did it again. You get a lot of those answers. And so what you really have to do is just step back, and what I like to do, you know, early on, when you're just introducing this concept, I found I had to be personally involved a lot more in it. But again, I was trying to teach them how to do the process, and then I wanted to get out of the way, give them the template, if you will, show and tell. But we would go through there and get a team and just kind of argue and debate about, well, I think this happens, then I think that happens. And so, you know, it doesn't have to be perfect. You just need it to be kind of representative to start with. And then as you go through the digital marketing, you'll get the feedback. And then you start going, no, that box doesn't really go there, it's further down here. And what you're really trying to do with the digital engagement, I didn't really touch on that in the comments, I should have, is you're trying to kind of move people, I call it kind of up a trust curve, right? If people don't really know you, how much trust does it really take, either as a prospective client or a recruit, to give you your information and start telling you all about yourself? That's why traditional recruiting doesn't really work very well, because what happens is you call the HR department and you say, hey, I need a 12-year tax accountant. What do? They start sourcing. What does that mean? Hey, do you want a job? Call them. Hey, do you want a job? Hey, do you want? It's all cold calling, is what they're doing. Most people are like, no, I don't even know you, why are you calling me, I don't trust you. You know, there's no trust. But you know what'll happen is you might land on the one tax accountant that had a bad day, and they're saying, you know, I am interested in a job. HR is thrilled, I got a warm one. This may be a pissed off person who's a terrible employee. That's the reason why they're looking for a job. You have no idea what you're getting. Versus, if I go out and develop relationships as part of a recruiting strategy, where I've identified who the good tax accountants are in the area, I've connected to them on LinkedIn, I'm showing them content, months, weeks, consistently. At some point, they're gonna raise their hand and say, I'm interested in this. We actually had, at Equity, we had a really well-known engineer in the Houston community, 25, 30-year guy. This guy could have gone anywhere. He had that kind of reputation. He had been seeing our content, and he basically concluded there's something different about this company. I want to explain. And when we did sit down and interview with him at lunch, he said to me, you know, Bob, I read you guys' content for years, and I kept thinking there's something different. I kept asking myself, who do I know that could get me an interview? Okay? That's when the light bulb went on, and I realized we're doing recruiting all wrong. Recruiting is marketing. It's not HR. I went back to the office, I moved it to the marketing department. This is just another kind of selling. That's what it is, right? Yes, sir. I'm sorry, this gentleman was for, hey, sorry.
Bob, I just want to say, great book. I just finished Cleanup on Aisle 6 chapter.
Yeah.
How much of your time as CEO do you think you spent in culture and people development?
I'm sorry, what was it?
How much time did you spend in culture and people development as the CEO?
How much time did I spend in my career in culture and people? Well, I would say the first, probably first half of my senior leadership experience, I probably did nothing on culture because I just, I thought it was some kind of vapor. I just didn't know what to do with it. I'd read about it, I'd go to a seminar, and I'd come back going like, I don't know what to do with this. So, shame on me, I wasn't smart enough. And again, the book goes through the journey of how I landed on this and really changed things. The second half, tremendous amount of time being spent on it because it's, in my view, culture is everything. It's everything. If you get that right, it can make your job so incredibly, so stinking easy relative to what it was before. It's never gonna be an easy job. You can make it a whole lot better. People development, I think probably early in my career I was doing it without realizing it. And the reason I say that is because you can really track through my business career. There are a lot of people that followed me around from one company to the other, and they sort of recognized there was just something innately different in the way that I developed people and interacted with them, and they hadn't experienced that in other places. And so when I would get recruited away to go somewhere else, they'd shortly be calling me going, can I come? And I just thought because we were, developed kind of a nice working relationship. But I think if they were here, I think what they tell you is that they really like that style of servant leadership, and they just weren't finding it elsewhere. I'd say later in my career, I was much more intentional about it. At Quiddity in particular, I think I was probably about 5 years into that assignment. I went to the board of directors, and I told them I had a specific retirement date in place. It was about 4 or 5 years down the road. And I said I wanted to start the transition, and the board looked at me and said, well, what are we doing? We don't have to start this early. And I said, yes, we do. Yes, we do. We have to start now. Like we should have started earlier, probably, because part of it is, it's not just information exchange. Here's how you do X, here's how you do Y. They need to live the experience so that they are living the day-to-day in a process where I'm there kind of as the training wheels to make sure that things don't go off the rails. And we can also have these sessions where I can sit down and say, okay, here's how you handle this situation. Did you think about maybe doing it this way as opposed to doing it that way? I mean, I can have those seemingly insignificant discussions because I'm doing that transition with a purpose in mind. So to me, I was always thinking, especially the last 2/3 of my career, I was always thinking about how to develop my next leader because I never knew when I was going to need it. If something happened to me, I got, the board sends me off to go do something else, I gotta have somebody that can step in and do what I want. If I wait till the need is there, that's not gonna work very well. Did that answer your question? I'm sorry, sir.
What, if anything, things different about the leadership model of the board, or even more the chair of the board, in sort of promoting the leadership model, promoting the CEO?
So let me see if I understand. Are you asking me about the role of the chairman of the board in the process of like culture or strategy or?
Yeah, sort of the role of the leadership model of promoting what you want the CEO to promote, sort of what
Well,
anything's different now.
Yeah, I can only, I guess, comment about the way I sort of saw it and what I looked at was, when I would interview for a leadership position, honestly, I was interviewing the board probably as much as they were interviewing me, because I really wanted to share with them kind of what I saw as necessary to be successful, and then, see how they reacted to that. Were they gonna support me in that, or were they gonna cut my knees out from underneath me the first chance they got? And a lot of times I would say that's tied directly to the ownership structure, quite honestly. If you're working for a Fortune 500 company, publicly traded, they've got a lot of external reporting responsibilities that have to be satisfied. And those are things you're not gonna change as the CEO. So you have to look at that basically and say, does my leadership model comport with what those obligations are gonna ask me to do or not? If you get into partnerships or family-owned businesses or single proprietors, different story. They have the ability to think longer term about things. So I would say that probably had more to do with whether I was gonna take an assignment than anything. It was just getting that playback. Because if I'm hearing things like, our purpose is solely to make money, I was never interested in running that kind of business, even though I know how to make money. Because to me it was like, well, if that's your whole purpose, what won't you do? What line won't you cross? And there was one job I took where I violated that rule, and I regretted it almost from the first day I was there. Because that's exactly what I found myself working for, was somebody who would do anything. And you find yourself compromised as the leader, where I'm getting direction, do I salute and do it? Violate my own principles? Or not? So I didn't like being in that position. So I'm not sure if I've answered your question, but that's.
No, I'm interested, if you were hiring board chairs, I could sort of frame the question. What would you be looking for in a board chair to promote the model you'd like for CEOs to be?
Well, I think the first thing is they've got to be a strategic thinker. They've got to have some relevant experience that applies to your particular business, your particular industry. I'm not saying you couldn't take somebody far afield. I'm not sure I put him as the chair. You could put some people like that, some directors on there that can help with certain things. But if you're talking about a for-profit business, I think somebody who's going to be compatible with the culture would be awfully important. You don't want somebody running that board that thinks very different, has different value sets, thinks in a very different strategic way. So alignment would be awfully important, I think, in that process. I have to think a little bit more about that, because honestly, nobody's ever asked me to hire a chairman, so I don't know. I'd probably really, everything I've told you is probably wrong, probably. Sorry, but I can't help you. Other questions? Was this helpful today? I hope this wasn't too
Thank
expensive.
you.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you for your time. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Fantastic, beautiful. Well, we almost followed through on our promise. We promised to have you out the door by 9:15. It's going to be a few minutes after that, but I certainly hope you've enjoyed this half as much as I have. It's been, I've known this guy. It's been almost 10 years since I read Bob's candidate packet before it went to the board. And he's been an inspiration, every year. So this has been great. Thank you again for coming. Thanks for our co-sponsors. And thanks to all of the hardworking Allen Austin employees who helped put this together. A lot of heavy lifting in this. Lauren, thank you. Michaela for getting up at the crack of dawn. Sorry your car wouldn't get out of the garage this morning. Liz T, Liz A, Rob W, Edie, who's fortunately in Portugal. Great team effort, wonderful experience. Thank you all. Have a great, what?
You missed the man and the.
Oh, and Gary, excuse me, I'm sorry. Anyway, thank you very, very much, and have a great week.